Hi, I'm Jessica Ahmed, and I'm back with another episode of our video series. The idea that blockchain has a big role to play outside of simply banks and exchanges is catching on. To take this conversation forward, I will be speaking with Dr. Jane Thomason, who is a prominent thought leader based in Australia with an expertise on the social impact of blockchain. So hang around and become a part of the discussion in the next segment. So can we just start by talking about how and when you realized that blockchain could actually help in this matter?
Well, I've spent most of my life working in emerging economies on problems of healthcare, governance, women's empowerment, and economic growth. And so I have a long understanding of some of the challenges that particularly impact on emerging economies. And a few years ago, my son actually told me that I needed to buy Bitcoin. That was in 2010, and I didn't do it. And then he came to me a few years later. At that time, it was 10 cents. And he came a few years later and he said, "Mum, remember when I told you to buy Bitcoin?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, it's $3,000 now. You should have bought some." And he said, "Now, Mum, I'm going to tell you this. You need to learn about blockchain. That's the platform that Bitcoin's built on, and it's going to change everything. So this time you need to listen to me." And so I did. And then I started reading about it and trying to understand it. And then suddenly one day I realized I was thinking about a humanitarian disaster. We had worked in Banda Aceh at the time of the Boxing Day tsunami when 200,000 people were lost to the tsunami. And I suddenly had this realization that even though the tragedy occurred, no one knew who was washed away, no one knew who was still around. All the bank records were lost, all the land records were lost, all of the medical records were lost. And so the rehabilitation and reconstruction was really difficult because everything didn't exist anymore. And I suddenly thought, if all of this had been securely stored on a blockchain with an identity, a biometric identity that people could reconnect with their health records, their land records, their identities, then the reconstruction would have been a lot smoother. And I suddenly thought, this can really change things. And then I was determined to learn about it and understand how it had applications for poverty and inequality and humanitarian disaster.
Right. Is it such that the situation of the underprivileged and the challenges they face is different in different parts of the world?
Well, of course, it's different in that cultures are different, people's beliefs are different. In some parts of the world, people own customary land, for example, that it's a community-owned land. Some people have individual land rights, some people have none. And so whatever the technology can do its part, but it always has to be contextualized for the country and for the community that you're working with, because you also need to remember that many people, the last mile population, they're not necessarily digitally literate. So the fact that you can give them a technology that can do something doesn't mean that they know how to use it or that they will want to use it. So all of those things have to be taken into account. And then the final thing, which you would be aware of, is that the poor often don't have basic infrastructure. So a lot of projects are being built for smartphone applications, but often the most difficult to reach populations, they don't have smartphones. Probably they don't have electricity, and almost certainly they don't have internet. So the solutions that have to be devised for those populations are not going to be the solutions that are being built in Silicon Valley and New York and London. They have to be purposed for the communities and the places that they're going to go.
Right. So I believe it's going to be quite expensive for, say, the economically developing countries to move their infrastructure to blockchain. So have the governments of these countries been very open to it? Was it easy to convince them? And how far have they come along with the idea?
So I think there's probably three pieces to that question. The first one is, I think that the solution is going to be mobile. And so I don't think, major infrastructure is going to be the problem here. So that's the first point. The second point is that There are only a few governments at the moment who are embracing this. So you would be aware of Estonia, which was one of the earliest adopters. And there are countries like Dubai who, excuse me, are going to go paperless on the blockchain by 2020. You've got Mauritius and you've got Bermuda. So there's a handful of countries who are really pushing out there and saying, you know, we're moving fast with this. And there are others who are moving thoughtfully at a different pace. And so governments need to understand the benefits of the technology, to be persuaded by seeing examples of where it's been used before and where it works, and then to think about their own adoption. But I would also say that governments embracing digital technologies won't be purely blockchain in any event, because all of these technologies are converging. So you're going to see blockchain with AI or with IoT, you know, or with drones and aerial analytics. So you're going to see a convergence of technologies that solve problems that governments are facing. You know, there's soon to be coming out of Kenya a report of the Kenya Blockchain Task Force. And I'm led to believe that this is going to be very much focused on the key problems that Kenya's established for its own economy and people, and looking at how blockchain and other technologies can be applied to that. So I think that's the way we're going to see governments looking at it, and the ones that have the most problems, I suspect, will be the ones who will move fastest.
What are their biggest concerns and doubts about blockchain, the governments basically?
Well, I think the first thing is that people are scared of cryptocurrencies. So Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies and all the speculation has given blockchain a bit of a bad name, because blockchain is the platform on which these things are built, but it is not about cryptocurrencies. So I think the first thing is to get over that fear of cryptocurrencies and being used for illegal purposes and so forth, and then help people to understand how blockchain can be applied to health or education or supply chain or climate change. So I think we have to move from talking about blockchain to talking about the problems that they care about that technology can solve.
And I just wanted to know, how can blockchain actually alleviate poverty?
Well, I wouldn't say blockchain in itself can alleviate poverty, but the sorts of things that it can do, which are going to potentially improve the lives of poor people. First of all, you've got about 1.5 billion people in the world who don't have an identity. So blockchain has the capacity to be able to fairly simply, working with a biometric, create a safe, secure, immutable identity for people who don't have one. Once you have an identity, then that potentially gives you access to the economy, whether you have, maybe you have some crops to sell, or maybe you produce some weaving or basketware, or, you know, shells that you can sell to a market. When you've got an identity and you can connect to the economy, you can trade. It also means potentially that if you have land, that you can use that with your identity as collateral to be able to borrow money to invest or to do something. So I think what it does is it connects people in a way they've not been connected, but it also allows many countries in the world, including a number of states of India, provide cash transfers to poor people. What it can do is be very precise about where those cash transfers go, who receives them, and what they're spent on. So it allows sort of precision targeting of things like cash transfers for the poor.
And speaking of empowering women, so exactly how can, say, women who are not very educated and obviously not tech savvy, so how can they avail the advantages of blockchain?
Look, I think a lot of work needs to be done on that, because often women are the least digitally literate of the population. But having said that, if you're able to, first of all, get access to women, whether it's to mobile phones or a way that they're going to be able to connect and create an identity, there's a number of different ways that it's going to be able to help them, both from property rights, for example, if they own property and they can register their property on a blockchain and prove that it's theirs in circumstances where others might want to take it away from them, particularly after death of a spouse or something like that. Identity for human trafficking is a key one, and there's a number of different organisations who are looking at how to use blockchain to prevent human trafficking. Simple things like women's and children's health, and making sure that the drugs and medical supplies that are provided for women and children are not fake, that they're actually, you understand the provenance where they come from, and they're going to be able to treat conditions matters. If you want to be able to provide transfers to women to attend a delivery in a hospital or to go to antenatal clinics, you can provide the cash transfers directly to the women using their identity to do that. And all of the economic benefits of blockchain can accrue to women if they've got something to sell, or they want to trade, or they want to form cooperatives. So there's many different ways, but you know, as I acknowledged in the beginning, that women are often going to need more help to be able to use the technology. But people are experimenting with that now, and in fact, there's a state in India called Chhattisgarh that has a large population of people who are not connected to the world tribal population, and they've given out 5 million mobile phones to tribal families, and they've given them to the women in the families. And so watching what happens in, if you like, major social experiments like that is going to teach us a lot and help us understand what are the impacts of doing things like that. Because we don't know, we're learning, and I think that's one of the things. People want a definitive answer. There's not a definitive answer. This is a new technology. People are inventing the future now, and what we can do is watch and learn, and from the government's point of view, help shape and understand it so that it actually does serve the citizens. So I think now is the time for governments to get involved and pay attention and learn themselves and help make this such that it does have a positive impact for their citizens.
So how far do you think all of this has come to manifestation, and how much do you think it will, how far will it go in 2019?
Well, the answer is it depends. So most of the use cases that we're tracking, they only started in 2016 or 2017, the ones that are really trying to work in emerging economies to impact on the lives of the poor. So it's pretty early stage. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, how do we get them to be able to accelerate and get to the point where they can be scaled? And the answer is a number of different people need to help them to do that, because you need to mobilise capital, you need to have government support if it's something to do with, you know, provision of services to citizens. So you need to have industry support, and you need to be able to support these young innovators to build companies and products and services that are actually going to be scalable. So there's a lot of work to be done, and one of my focus areas is really trying to talk to government and international institutions, not to stand back and watch the technology, but to get involved in shaping, to get involved in learning and documenting case studies so that people know what's actually happening somewhere and what's achievable, and help try and accelerate the technology so that it can achieve the promise that it has but hasn't yet fulfilled.
So that concludes today's episode. Join me again next time as I explore more interesting ways blockchain is impacting the world around us.